Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
If you're listening to this live, it probably means that you are in the middle of procrastinating what's probably a final paper or studying for a final exam, and I'm very disappointed in you. I'm kidding. It is our final episode of the season. It's crazy how fast that goes by. It's episode number 55. I counted before we started. And I wish that it was episode 80 so that we could have said that this was episode 80 for Brady, but it's not. So unfortunately, we'll do episode 55 for not Tom Brady. Today we're talking about Tom Brady, Giselle, and the theoretical lens that we've chosen for this episode is turning points. Which should be a really, really good one. And in order to help me talk about these issues is now three-time guest of the pod, Dr. Sammy Shebib. Sammy, can't thank you enough for joining me during your finals week.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It should be another good one. We are in full swing of end of semester mode. And what better way to talk or to ring in the end of the semester than to talk about someone who's ringing in the end of his professional football career in Tom Brady, who should have retired, 3 years ago? I don't know. Not my call, but I will put my personal disliking of Tom Brady aside to talk about this one. I want to talk about the relationship that he had with international supermodel Giselle and the various public turning points that they've had during their relationship. Are you down for that conversation?
Of course, let's go. Especially with the NFL draft going on.
The NFL draft is going on. Me personally, I'm a baseball guy, but I certainly respect the athleticism involved in football. And there's nobody more seasoned in that great sport than one Tom Brady. You know what's crazy is when I was going over my notes for this episode, I wanted to know what episode I need to reference in order to be like, okay, so we've talked about turning points before. With that said, yada, yada, yada. But then I realized we didn't do an episode on turning points. So that's kind of where we need to start. Now, turning points aren't a communication theory per se. So I think the first thing to do is kind of unpack, what are turning points and what do we gain from understanding relationships through a turning point perspective?
Yeah, so turning points are moments of change, and relational turning points specifically are events that spark a change in one's relationship. And they can occur in all types of relationships, whether it be romantic ones, familia, social, or even, professional relationships. And turning points actually uses a specific type of analysis, and it recognizes that relationships have this potential to change in a positive or negative way at any given point. And turning points that are seen as positive are typically attributed to higher levels of intimacy or perceived closeness with the romantic partner or the relational partner. And then turning points that are seen as negative are usually attributed to decreases of intimacy or closeness. And some, common examples of potential, relational turning points can include everything from, the first time you meet someone to the first time that they say, that they love you, or even your first big fight. And one of the significant contributions of turning points is really understanding the dyadic nature, in addition to how events can shift focus and increase intimacy or closeness, or decrease the intimacy and closeness between romantic partners.
Yeah, you know what? So turning points are a product of Leslie Baxter, who is one of the ultimate it's Leslie Baxter, it's Judy Burgoon, and then I guess you could throw Chuck Berger in there just because of uncertainty reduction theory. But Leslie Baxter is one of those communication scholars who has her fingerprints all over everything. I mean, multiple theories written. The scholars that we know today, they studied under Leslie Baxter. When I think about turning points, I think about the slope study that Leslie Baxter did, where in the first part, she asked couples, I want you to think about your life as if it were a book. And I want you to lay out the chapters of that book. What would the titles of those chapters be? And I think that's such a brilliant way to conceptualize what a turning point is. Like the chapter of the title of each chapter of the book that is your relationship. And then the next part, when they had them plot on an XY graph where each turning point lied, and then drew lines and measured the slopes of those lines, like just from like a quantitative perspective. That's like a very funny way to do things. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But I think that conceptualization of them really reiterates what you were saying in terms of these like big, meaningful relationship moments that shape the trajectory of the future of the relationship, for better or worse, depending on the nature of the turning point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, like visually seeing the turning point analysis on that plot and on the diagrams and stuff is actually visually kind of articulates and tells us a lot about the relationship too. And when two people have different perceptions of a singular event, right? One could perceive them as increasing intimacy or closeness, where the other's like, after this big fight, I want out.
Yeah, I'm picturing
there's drops.
like imagine like a couple that has their first sexual encounter, and for one they were like, "Oh, that was the moment I knew they were the one," and the other one was like, that actually made me think if I want to still be with them anymore. So it's very interesting. I think the dyadic nature of it, the individual, and then the coupled nature of it, very, very interesting stuff.
Yes.
So let's talk about Tom Brady. Brady and Giselle have had, much like Prince Harry and Meghan, have had moments of privacy and then moments of like spectacular public elements. So can you maybe rattle off a couple of the most meaningful turning points that Tom Brady and Giselle have experienced, and maybe talk about how those turning points altered their commitment and ultimately their relationship trajectory, which, as we now know, is ending in a split?
Yeah, and then Giselle actually wrote this memoir, and she states that like kind of John has made her heart expand in ways that she didn't even know was possible, which is the eldest son of Tom Brady. And she's often referred to John as like her bonus child. So even though they had this difficulty that was present in the very, initial phases of their relationship, after the birth, it seems like, it has really increased their closeness and potential intimacy between them. And then we know, obviously, that they got married in February of 2009. Shortly thereafter, they had their son in December of 2009, and then their daughter in December of 2012. Mm-hmm. So a lot of like increases after the birth of the eldest son for Tom. And then in September of 2015 was the first time we started receiving reports from sources, specifically from Us Weekly, that things were very tense between Giselle and Tom. This was particularly after Deflategate, which was an NFL controversy revolving around accusations that Brady ordered the deflating of footballs in the AFC Championship game in the 2014 and 2015 NFL playoffs. And so that was kind of the first news that we had heard about any specific like tensions prior to Bridget. Bridget's pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And then we know that they celebrated 10 years, like in February of 2019. And then we started hearing some stuff, right? We fast forward into February of 2022. This is when Brady announced his retirement on Instagram. And then 6 weeks after Brady's retirement announcement, so in March of 2022, Tom revealed that he was going to return to the NFL, also via Instagram. Mm-hmm. And this is where we then started hearing a lot more kind of tensions, especially tensions in terms of Giselle's perceptions of Tom rejoining the NFL.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that stick out to me there. And the first one is that what might have been traditionally considered as not just a relational turning point, but as a relational transgression, which ironically you and I have talked about on this show before, it is the birth of what Giselle calls her bonus child, right? But this ended up being something that potentially increased their closeness and intimacy. And I think that really speaks to the dynamic nature of turning points, both theoretically and in practice.
Yeah.
The other thing that really sticks out to me there is the ways in which the relationship began to deteriorate, beginning, like you said, closer to 2015. which kind of transitions into the next question that I had for you, which was that the media perception was that Brady chose football over family, right? And that's what led to the divorce. And I guess my question is, to what extent is that a reliable report? Like, is it that Brady was just so involved with football from 2015 through now that she just couldn't take it anymore? Or were there non-football things contributing to this? And either way, surely that media and public involvement couldn't have helped. So I'm hoping we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so actually, this is not true from Giselle's own mouth. According to Giselle, and she recently kind of opened up about her relationship with Tom in a new cover story for Vanity Fair that came out in this past March. So, relatively recent news. She said that what's been portrayed in the media about the demise of her marriage, specifically that she sought a divorce because of Brady's backing out of retirement to play football for one more season, was just simply untrue. She said that what's been said is one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and that it's not so, in quotes, black and white. Sometimes you grow together and sometimes you grow apart. Those are verbatim her words. And I think that really kind of highlights that they had other problems in their marriage. And then obviously this was a contributing factor, but it was not a singular isolating event that led to the destruction or the dissolution of their marriage. And in a lot of situations, it's not these just singular events that lead to dissolution. And I think that this is really highlighting that, like multiple things and them growing apart, right? Just not having the same perspective anymore. She stated that when she was 26 years old and Tom was 29 years old is when they met, and they wanted a family and they wanted things together. And as time went by, they started to realize that they just wanted different things. And now they had this kind of choice to make. And that doesn't mean that you don't love the partner anymore. It just means that in order for you to be authentic and truly live the life that you want to live, you have to sometimes let people go, right? And it's a dance and it's a balance that you're kind of constantly playing.
I think that's such a good point. This is something I tell my students all the time when we talk about breakups in my close relationship course. I do my best to make them think about what we mean when we say successful relationship, right? We're talking about Brady and Giselle. They've been together for 15 years, right? If you go back to when they first started dating.
Right.
That's a really long time, right? And so I guess my question that I ask my students is always, would you rather have a 6-year happy relationship that ends after 6 years, or would you rather be stuck in a rut for 25 years with this person who you're not even that crazy about? Which of those two sounds successful, right? And I think, right, relational success is more than just sticking it out because you feel like you have to.
Yeah, and relationship success, in my opinion too, just because a relationship ended doesn't mean it wasn't successful, right? Everybody's meant to be in your life for a specific period of time, and that time can vary and change. But I think what makes it successful is your ability to reflect on it and grow from it, right? And it's not always just ending up together. It's kind of the roles that they play in your life at the time that they're supposed to be in your life. And if we can start thinking about things like that too, we can start to understand that these things aren't failures either, right? It's not a bad thing that something ended, right? Sometimes things have to end for other doors and opportunities to open, and that's okay,
100%. 100%. And I think that that's kind of again, I think that the public image feeds into that idea of oh, well, they broke up, so there must have been something that happened. There must have been this big relational transgression, like Tom Brady deciding that he wants to play football for another year, when in reality, relationships are very complicated and deep. And so you've got all these relational factors flying around, and when you have a public celebrity relationship, that's not an interesting story. You know what I mean? That's not what people want to write about. And so, unfortunately, folks often force a story where there might not necessarily be one. I don't like Tom Brady. And I also don't want to see Tom Brady's relationship dragged through the mud. I don't think that helps anybody. So.
Yeah, the role that media plays in these relationships, I mean, I would assume it's got to be difficult, right? With everybody kind of up in your business, making, attributions of situations or events that occur that aren't actually true into your feelings or your perceptions either. It's got to be quite difficult, to always overcome. But they've been in the spotlight for, a significant portion of their lives. And so, their ability to maybe tune out the noise might be greater than, our ability to do that if we were thrown into that situation. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. And, obviously this is just coming from our perceptions, right, of the news and the information that we have, and not actually, their accounts of going through, the relationship and what they would trajectorily change, these significant events on an actual diagram.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that the media plays into that. The last thing that I really wanted to talk about today was in the vein of turning points. I want to talk about on again, off again relationships, which is another thing that we've never talked about on this show. The data is limited, but also fairly consistent in so much as on again, off again relationships, they don't really work out that well. I think specifically it's if you're with someone, then you break up, then you get back together, and then you break up. That next time, that third wave where you get back together, that's when the odds of relational stability plummet. So if we're extrapolating, and who's to say that Brady and Giselle would even be interested in getting back together? But do we think that they might eventually get back together, maybe after a few years apart? Specifically, I asked that because of what you said earlier in relation to both the fact that they have kids and now have to co-parent, but just also that even the child of Brady that is not Giselle's is an important person in her life. Do you think that having kids alters those odds of them potentially getting back together?
Okay, so in terms of them getting back together, I would say never say never, right? I will never say never. As of right now, it doesn't look like it. And in terms of the trajectory of just Tom Brady and Giselle in general, they've never really broken up prior to now. So it doesn't seem like that's something that's been in their relationship trajectory, in the past. I would say, if anything, the fact that you have kids together maybe makes you kind of stay in situations that aren't as satisfying, right? And trying to tough it out. I don't necessarily know if that would mean that you're going to go back to that person, right? I think it was just more of a challenge to leave that person in the in the get-go. That's my perception. And again, we don't have a lot of research on again, off again relationships. And the research that we have is really primarily focused in, the dating portions as opposed to the marital portions, right? Like getting married, then divorcing, then getting married again, right? And the research on that, even the statistics on that in terms of marrying, divorcing, and then marrying that person again are relatively slim. So, obviously we don't really know, but I feel like this was one that was probably well thought out in advance. It wasn't just this like singular moment that occurred that made these decisions. And it seems like they're pretty drastic decisions too. Like they growing apart and changing your perspectives, right? Having like different wants and needs in life. That's kind of hard to kind of get back onto the same page, right? So I don't know. This one kind of looks like this is going to be potentially one that doesn't necessarily get back together, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a healthy co-parenting relationship, right? And holidays together and things like that. I feel like they're going to be successful at being, a family unit, because that's just kind of always something that they've emphasized. Bridget has always been a big part in both of their lives too, which is the mother to their eldest. And, it seems like they're still kind of riding that trajectory and have close communications with all three of them.
Yeah, I think that all of that questioning, right, to say this is another turning point for them, right? And in this turning point, they are altering the nature of their relationship. Now, many relationships don't have those turning points that are relationship altering unless it's like getting married or breaking up. But in this case, they're shifting from husband and wife to co-parent. And so that is a turning point worth acknowledging for sure. It's a chapter in that book, is it not?
Yeah, I mean that book doesn't end. It's still going, right? We're just having new chapters, new names, and new titles and new possibilities that they're opening up. I would say if we were putting this on a graph, this isn't a graph that's just like ending right there, right? It's still having to go because of the fact that they're co-parenting, or maybe they're still even friends. We know that they are still in communication, a tad with each other. It's not like they're talking about, just their everyday situations, but about the kids and stuff like that. And so we know that they're still in a relationship. It's just not romantic at the moment.
Right. Good point. Good point. We have a couple of minutes left, and in that couple of minutes, I want to attend to our bonus question, which I rarely get to, but we did manage to make a little bit of time. So this, as I mentioned, was episode 55. I think we've had 5 seasons now, or 6 seasons. I think it's 6. I'm out of ideas. I don't know what to do for next season. Do you have any ideas on a theme for next season?
I don't actually have too many. I mean, obviously my gut reaction went to like the dark side, but it's kind of been something that's been highlighted throughout all of the seasons that you've done. So I don't necessarily know if it needs, a specific season, but it would be cool to highlight these, dialectical tensions of concepts, right? That things aren't just inherently good or bad for your relationship, that they can cross thresholds and they can change, right? If we think about infidelity and situations like that, a lot of people come back and will look at those situations as blessings, right? That they happened, they got out of these toxic relationships or unfulfilling ones because of that event. And so it would be kind of cool to see. It's been bothering me recently that people are just very judgmental of certain things, like ghosting. They're just like, that's bad. I'm like, actually, there are some situations where ghosting is actually very effective.
Good point.
And is vital, maybe too.
Yeah, especially in like stalking
just
relationships. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, right? Or even potentially abusive ones,
Yes.
right? You need to maybe ghost that person for your own safety and well-being. And so I think that, I try to highlight that in my work, that things aren't just inherently a good thing or a bad thing in relationships. And if, I think that would be kind of interesting, but I'm sure there's probably better ideas.
No, that's got me thinking about like maybe an episode on modern relational trends or behaviors, like an episode on ghosting, an episode on love bombing, an episode, you know what I mean? Like, stuff like that, like on more modern terms.
Parenting.
Helicopter parenting is a good one. Yeah, maybe there's room for that, where we take some of the more modern lexicon and fold it into, unpack it. That's a good idea. You said you didn't have any ideas.
Yeah, well, I guess it was the conversation, the dyadicness led to an idea.
Fair. Well, on that note, it's time to go. Sammy, thank you so much for once again joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. And that's it. Another semester, another season wrapped up. I don't know what we'll be doing next season, but we will be back for more fun stuff. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a wonderful break.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from a podcast studio.